A short time after this, Lysias became very displeased with what had happened. Lysias was the king's guardian and second in command, and he was a member of the royal family. He gathered 80,000 soldiers and all his horsemen with the intention of capturing Jerusalem and making it a Greek settlement. He intended to tax the temple, as he did the shrines of other nations, and to auction off the office of high priest every year. He had no regard for the power of God, but proudly trusted in his numerous foot soldiers, thousands of horsemen, and 80 elephants. He came into Judea and approached Beth-zur, a fortified place about 32 kilometers from Jerusalem. He began to vigorously attack it. When Maccabeus and his men learned that the strongholds were under siege, everyone cried out to the Lord. With tears they begged him to send a good angel to rescue Israel. Maccabeus himself was the first to take up arms, and he urged the others to follow him into battle in order to help their fellow Jews. So they rushed out together. While they were still near Jerusalem, a horseman in white clothing appeared to them brandishing gold weapons. Together they praised the merciful God and took such courage that they were ready to assault not only the men but also the fiercest beasts and walls of iron. So they advanced in battle formation, having a heavenly ally, the merciful Lord. Like lions they leaped on the enemy, killing 11,000 foot soldiers and 1,600 horsemen and sending all the rest fleeing for their lives. Most of those who fled were wounded and without weapons. Even Lysias was forced to flee in shame. But Lysias was not stupid. He saw the loss he had suffered and realized that the Hebrews could not be overcome, because the mighty God fought along with them. So Lysias sent a message to them, urging them to settle everything on just terms and promising to make the king their friend. Maccabeus thought about what would be best for everyone, so he accepted Lysias's offer. The king, in turn, consented to all the Jews' requests, which Maccabeus had submitted in writing to Lysias. Lysias wrote the following letter to the Jews. This letter is from Lysias to the Jewish people. Greetings. John and Absalom, your messengers, have delivered your written terms and requested that I grant them. I have reported all the necessary details to the king, and he has granted as much as he can. If, therefore, you will remain loyal to the government, I will endeavor to help you from now on. I have given verbal orders that my officials and your messengers should talk with you about the details. Farewell. This letter was written on April in the 148th year of Greek rule. The king had written this letter to Lysias. This letter is from King Antiochus to his brother Lysias. Greetings. Now that our father has taken his place among the gods, we desire that those in our realm should be left undisturbed in caring for their own affairs. We understand that the Jews will not accept the Greek customs of our father. They prefer to keep their own ways and have asked us to allow them to follow their own customs. Since we desire that this nation should be at peace, we have decided that their temple should be restored to them and that they may live according to the custom of their ancestors. You will do well, therefore, to write to them and pledge them your friendship. When they have heard this decision, they will be able to rest easy and look after their own business. The king's letter to the Jews was as follows. This letter is from King Antiochus to the Jewish High Council and to the Jewish people. Greetings. We hope you are well, as we ourselves are well. Menelaus told us that you wish to return home and look after your own affairs. We therefore grant safe conduct to all who go home by the 26th of April. We also decree that the Jews may follow their own food laws, as they did before, and that none of them will be harassed in any way for things they may have done in ignorance. I have sent Menelaus to reassure you. Farewell." This letter was written on the 11th of April in the 148th year of Greek rule. The Romans also sent a letter to the Jews, which reads as follows. This letter is from Quintus Memmius and Titus Manius, ambassadors of the Romans, to the Jewish people. Greetings. Whatever Lysias, a member of the royal family, has granted you, we also grant. But he thought some things should be referred to the king. So confer among yourselves on these issues, and then send someone with a message. That way we can make good proposals on your behalf, for we are going to Antioch. Write back immediately so that we may know what you are thinking. Farewell." This letter was written on the 11th of April in the 148th year. When these agreements were made, Lysias returned to the king and the Jews turned their attention to farming. However, some of the governors would not let them live in peace. These governors were Timothy, Apollonius son of Genius, Hieronymus, Demophon, and Nicanor the governor of Cyprus. The people of Joppa also committed an evil deed. They invited the Jews who lived among them, men, women, and children, to go for a boat ride. Since this was an obvious sign of friendship, the Jews publicly voted to accept the offer. They did not suspect a thing and wanted to be on friendly terms. But when the boats were some distance from the shore, the people of Joppa drowned at least 200 of the Jews. As soon as Judas heard about this cruelty to his fellow Jews, he assembled his men for action. After calling upon God, the just judge, he attacked those murderers of his fellow Jews. He set the port on fire in the night, burned the boats, and killed with the sword those who had taken refuge there. Then he left, since the town's gates were closed, but he planned to return again to completely destroy all the people of Joppa. When he learned that the people of Jamnia also planned to wipe out the Jews who lived among them, he attacked Jamnia at night and set the port and its ships on fire. The light of the blaze was seen in Jerusalem 45 kilometers away. When they had gone more than a kilometer from Jamnia and were marching towards Timothy, over 5,000 Arabian foot soldiers and more than 500 horsemen attacked them. After a hard fight and with the help of God, Judas and his men won the victory. The defeated nomads asked Judas for a peace treaty, promising to give him livestock and to help the Jews in every other way. Thinking that they might indeed be useful in many ways, Judas promised them peace. After an exchange of pledges, the Arabians returned to their tents. Judas also attacked Caspan, a certain town that was surrounded by fortifications and walls and inhabited by all sorts of Gentiles. Confident in the strength of the walls and their supply of food, the people there became insolent, and they taunted Judas with mockery, blasphemy, and all sorts of evil words. But Judas and his men called upon the great ruler of the world, for in the time of Joshua, the Lord had crumbled the walls of Jericho without the use of battering rams or war machines. Then Judas fiercely assaulted the walls. By God's will, Judas and his men captured the town. They slaughtered so many people, a countless number, that a nearby lake that was about 400 meters wide seemed to overflow with blood. From there they marched 140 kilometers to Charax, to the Jews living in the land of Tob. But they did not find Timothy there, for he had left the area without doing anything, except that he left a very strong garrison in a certain fortress. Dositheus and 𝗕ci𝗿𝗿, who were captains under Maccabeus, went and killed the men Timothy had left in the fortress, over 10,000 in all. Maccabeus separated his men into divisions and appointed officers over them. He hurried after Timothy, who had with him 120,000 foot soldiers and 2,500 horsemen. When Timothy learned that Judas was coming after him, he sent the women and children and also the baggage to a fortress called 𝗠𝗰𝗰𝗯𝗲𝗲𝗀. This fortress was hard to besiege or attack because all the approaches were so narrow. But when Judas's first band of soldiers came into sight, their enemies were struck with fear because of an apparition sent by the All-Seeing One. The enemies fled in such confusion that many of them were injured by their own companions and wounded with their own swords. Judas went after them vigorously, killing the sinners by the sword, and he destroyed about 30,000 men. Timothy himself was captured by the soldiers of Dositheus and 𝗕ci𝗿𝗿𝗏. With great cunning, he begged them to let him live, for he held the parents and brothers of many of them, and if he died, they would also perish. When he had solemnly promised to return them unharmed, they released him in order to save their relatives. Judas then went to 𝗠𝗰𝗯 and the temple of 𝗕𝗏𝗀𝗀. There he killed 25,000 people. After he had destroyed these and put the rest to flight, Judas led his army to Ephron, a fortified town where Lysias and many people from various nations lived. Strong young men guarding the walls made a vigorous resistance, and they had many catapults and plenty of ammunition. But when the Jews invoked the name of the Sovereign One, whose power breaks the strength of his enemies, they captured the town and killed 25,000 of those who were inside. From there they pressed on to 𝗕ci𝗿𝗄𝗏, which lies 112 kilometers from Jerusalem. But the Jews who lived in 𝗕ci𝗿𝗄𝗏 testified that the people of the town were kind to them, especially during times of adversity. So Judas thanked the people, strongly urging them to remain friendly to Jews in the future. They arrived back at Jerusalem just before the festival of Pentecost. After the festival of Pentecost, Judas and his men marched out to attack 𝗤ģes, the governor of Idumea. 𝗤ģes met them with 3,000 foot soldiers and 400 horsemen. When the battle began, a few of the Jews were killed. Then a certain Dositheus, one of Basena's men and a strong horseman, caught hold of 𝗤ģes and began to drag him by his cloak. Dositheus would have taken the accursed man alive, but a Thracian horseman rushed at him and cut off his arm, and so 𝗤ģes escaped to 𝗬ṛisa. Meanwhile, since Esdras and his men had fought a long time and were weary, Judas called upon the Lord to be their helper and their leader in battle. After he chanted the battle cry in Hebrew, the language of their ancestors, accompanied by hymns, they made a surprise attack on Gorgias's troops and caused them to flee. Judas then assembled his army and went to the town of Adullam. Since the seventh day was approaching, they remained there to purify themselves according to custom and to keep the Sabbath. By the day after the Sabbath, it had become urgent that the bodies of the Jews who had been killed be removed, so Judas and his men went to bury them with their relatives in the tombs of their ancestors. But under the clothing of the dead they found some sacred amulets of the idols of Jamnia. The law forbids Jews to wear such things, so it was obvious to all that this was why these men had died. Then they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the just judge, who reveals things that are hidden. They spent time in prayer, asking the Lord to completely forgive the sin that had been committed. Then the noble Judas strongly urged the people to keep themselves free from sin, since they saw with their own eyes what happens to people who sin in the same way as those who had died. Taking up a collection from each person, Judas sent 2,000 silver coins to Jerusalem for a sacrifice to be offered for the sins of those who had died. In so doing he acted well and honorably, for he kept the resurrection in mind. If he had not expected that those who had died would rise again, it would have been useless and foolish to pray for the dead. But since he had in mind the splendid reward that awaits those who die a godly death, his thought in doing this was holy and devout. Therefore, he made this atoning sacrifice for the dead so that they might be released from their sin.